complete the survey. And that's pretty typical. I think we'll expect over the 5 years of the pilot to have, varying levels of engagement and people able to complete surveys. But the blessing of this 5-year pilot is that we'll be able to catch everyone at some point over that time and kind of track common themes. So that's a little bit of what I'm going to talk about today, some of the common themes we're seeing in the pilot. As a little background, we have a really diverse group of folks in this first cohort. So 6 of the individuals that completed their survey at wave 1 identify as white. 1 person identifies as Latinx. 6 people identify as African American. 1 person is Asian. We have 11 women in that cohort, 2 males, and 1 person who identifies as non-binary. And this is a reflection of the weighting system for the lottery. So we wanted to make sure that the lottery was random, but also socially just. So there were certain categories, women and racial minorities, who were more heavily weighted in the lottery, so that it was a unique characteristic among basic income pilots in the country that we had a socially just selection criteria, because we're both measuring the effects of basic income in people's lives, but we're also helping people in the Hudson community right now. In terms of education, we had 1 person with no high school or GED, 4 people who had completed their high school or GED, 3 people with some college, 5 people with an associate's or bachelor's, 1 person with a postgraduate degree, and 5 people who are currently pursuing higher ed. So again, there we have a really wide spread of human experience. 3 in 4 folks, more than 3 in 4 folks in 2019 were living below $20,000 in income. So we have pretty low income folks. The criteria to be included in the lottery was that you had to be below the median income for the area. But again, that was another selection criteria, as being lower income. We also saw that most folks had pretty low liquid assets. So that's cash, that's savings, that's investments. The average liquid assets of people when they first entered the pilot was about $1,800. So we'll be measuring that over time as well. So one of the overwhelming findings that people told me about, both in the surveys and interviews, is the increased financial stability and security that the pilot offers them. People use the word safety net over and over again. And so, the most obvious take, HudsonUP is providing participants with the ability to cover bills and essentials. So some quotes there are, I just take the money from the HudsonUP and pay my bills with it, and it comes to right over $500. So I just leave it alone in my bank and pay the bills, and it's helping me out a lot. HudsonUP has really affected me in a positive way. It's like I forget about it, and it just takes care of my bills and keeps me straight, and I don't get behind on payments. It's aiding me with providing for my son, assisting paying my rent. HudsonUP revolutionized my financial situation with the guaranteed income of $500 a month. I don't have to worry about how I'm going to pay for my rent. So a lot of people are using this for their bills, daily essentials, which we see over and over again in other pilots. That's a pretty consistent theme. Obviously, we can't separate what's going on with HudsonUP from the pandemic. So a lot of people described their experiences with HudsonUP as sort of a safety net in uncertain times. So one person said, more than anything, just knowing that I have a little cushion, a little safety net should things not come through, like other income, having that in the back of your head that if I don't meet all the things that I have, a little buffer. Another person said, I felt safe this whole time during the pandemic. I felt safe and healthy. Certainly scared for everyone, scared for my mom and my grandma, but not for myself, which is a wild feeling. So I think that's a really interesting thing as we're talking about the national conversation of UBI, which of course has grown during the pandemic, during the 2008 recessions, that UBI has the ability to really create a cushion for a lot of people as the economy swings. And we're seeing it swing pretty wildly right now, but there's always going to be folks who are sort of falling through the cracks of our economic system. And I also ask people about their future plans. I'm interested to know, how does this $500 a month affect people's ability to plan for their future? Because at wave 1, a lot of people told me, I'm really just living day by day. I'm not planning for the future. I'm just, really just trying to put food on the table tomorrow. So a lot of people told me that they were using the money to save for the future. One person said, my goal is to become debt free because you can't buy a house if you're in debt. So I want to save for a house and make smart choices. Another person said, I'm trying not to touch it because I really want to use it to set myself up for the future. And I don't want to burn through it all. So this is a person who is an artist. There's a strong artist community in Hudson, and doesn't have a 401k like many people do. So was viewing HudsonUP like building up a nest egg for the future. Other people were using it for higher ed and small business development. So one person said they wanted to get their associates to start with. Another person said, when my children are in school during the day, I can work and go to school at night. Another person was building an Airbnb in the upstairs of their house. Another person started a campground business. So people were really using the funds to be able to launch small businesses that would grow their income in the long term. Employment, there was a really amazing changes in employment between the first and second wave of interviews and surveys. So at wave one, the people working full-time and part-time was 29%. By wave two, that was 63%. And people who reported that they were not working for reasons other than retirement or disability went from 50% to 38% between wave one and two. Several people, when I talked to them at wave two, had either started new jobs or were able to return to work, or their small businesses had seen renewed demand last year. One person said last year was awful. This year it's picking up, and still not what it was pre-pandemic, but it's getting better. So of course, again, we can't separate what's happening in Hudson from the rest of the pandemic. So a lot of these improvements could have been reflections of the pandemic improving over the summer. That's the last time I talked to people, was in July. But several people did mention that HudsonUP was helping them aid their transition by allowing them to invest in their small business, or buying a car to get to more reliable work situations, that sort of thing. So the pandemic was improving, and they had these HudsonUP funds to sort of capitalize on that improving financial situation, which I think is really important. This is really interesting. So this is the short form 36. This is a measurement of people's health. And the gray bars are wave one, when I talked to people in January, February 2021, and the purple bars are when I talked to people in July. So on this scale, higher numbers are always better. So if you're looking at this, you'll see that the folks on average improved in every category except one, and in which they stayed consistent. So the short version of this is that folks' physical and emotional well-being improved in every area under examination, or stayed the same between waves one and two, which is really amazing. We have another scale that we use called the Kessler 10, which is a measurement of psychological distress. That number also went down. That's the positive direction that we would like to see. So they had decreased psychological distress between waves one and waves two. And a lot of people attributed that to HudsonUP. They said that HudsonUP had decreased their stress and improved their physical health for a lot of people. So, really simple things like, I'm just not stressing out about money anymore. People said that over and over to me, and there's a lot of literature that supports that. When you are constantly worried about money, it has a physical toll on the body, and it has a toll on your mental capacity. There's a lot of research behind that. So taking away that stress, having to constantly worry about how you're going to put food on the table and cover your bills, cover your rent, has a physical effect on the mind and the body. What's really interesting at wave two, a lot of people told me that they were seeing improvements in things like sleeping, eating, they were drinking less, they were exercising more. So one person said, my health has been better. Well, it could be because I've been doing more exercise and I have time to exercise and find that really helps with my health. Another person said sleep hygiene has been amazing. Mental health has been amazing. my ability to eat regularly, and I drink less. So again, these could be changes in the pandemic. Things were looking a little better by July. So this is something we're going to continue to track. But I want to reiterate that these are findings that are consistent in the basic income literature, that health improves, that stress decreases for people and pilots around the world. People also talked about the way that HudsonUP had improved their relationships with their family, with their friends, and with their community. So, for example, one person said, I'm contributing for my parents when they need it. Another person said they were helping their adult children because life happens and they need something. And you can say, okay, honey, I'll take care of this for you. Another person said, before now, I would have sometimes be embarrassed to ask for assistance constantly from my family. So now with the HudsonUP, I'm not in the position to be asking for money every time. Another person, this is really amazing, said I was able to go caretake for my mom for a month in another state for plane tickets and all of that, which costs so much money. And that person reiterated that there's no way they could have done that without the help of HudsonUP. And I think that there's a huge body of literature saying that the caretaking that especially women take on in the economy is so undervalued, and the basic income really has the potential to better facilitate those caretaking roles in our society that are undervalued. People talked about the improvements in their relationship with their friends. So one person said, and now with my friends now, I can treat them without having to worry about it or too much or buy them gifts. Another person said, I've been able to help my friends more when they need it. I'm not trying to be so precious with my money. I might as well cultivate my relationships. And other people talked about it improving their relationships with their community. Them having time to volunteer, working with children, which brings them so much joy, and investing in children in their community. And the HudsonUP gave them more time to do those things. A really interesting dynamic I noticed between wave 1 and 2 is that people started feeling like they had more agency in their lives. They had more control over the things that were happening around them. And this is really interesting. And what's something that even surprised me, even though I'm pretty embedded in the basic income literature, is that people started feeling more confidence to set boundaries around their well-being and their work-life balance. So for example, one person said, I'm trying not to overwork myself. I moved next door from a crowded housing situation with extended family, and it's perfect. I don't want to go back to fast food or retail. I want my RN. That's where my heart is. I've recently left there to work closer to home because the drive was just insane. So that person was changing jobs because her commute was too long. Another person who had been kind of bartending in kind of dive bar situation said, I'm still going back to bartending, but not at a dive bar, to bartend at a restaurant, to a safer, earlier hour style bartending. So this was a really interesting finding for me, that people had that cushion and that removal of the psychological strain that made them feel like they were able to set better boundaries around their health and well-being. There was also a really interesting dynamic among the single mothers in the pilot. They expressed again and again how they felt like they had more ability to provide for their children as a single mother. One person said, I actually have stability, something to look forward to, that I can take care of my kids. Another person said, HudsonUP has affected my financial situation in a very beneficial way. I was able to get a better vehicle to transport my kids back and forth to appointments in Albany. Another person said, I think it's affected my family because my kids don't see me stressing as much as trying to continue to keep food in the house or snacks in the cabinet. I'm not stressed out about bills. It's like that money is just afloat. And sometimes we go out and do fun activities because it's extra money left over. So I think that's a really interesting finding, that single mothers are seeing themselves as, improved parents because they don't have that financial strain. So just to recap the main findings, employment, both full-time and part-time, grew from 29% to 63% between the two waves. Participants experienced improved physical and mental health. Participants experienced decreased symptoms of psychological distress. And in my qualitative interviews, some of the themes that I saw emerge were greater stability and security, improved ability to make plans for the future, improved physical and mental health, improved family and community relationships, and improved feelings of individual agency. Something really exciting happening with the pilot right now is that in fall 2021, our funders added an additional 50 participants to the pilot. 23 of those so far have agreed to participate in research. And I'm actually conducting first round interviews with those folks now. So I'm really excited to see this pilot expand and help even more people. I am happy to answer any questions that we have coming through on YouTube. I'll stop sharing my screen there.
Thank you so much, Leah. It's so exciting to see this, and also to have just sort of like a very, what feels like a very quick overview of something that just started a year ago. So we can only imagine what things will look like in, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and how much change we'll see over that long term, which, for those of you out there that may not know, one of the unique things about HudsonUP is that we are a 5-year pilot, both for the first and second cohort. So we do have the advantage of being able to, follow the lives of the participants over the 5 years. So it's super exciting for us. And we know these are very preliminary findings, but they're very promising and exciting for us. So any questions folks may have, please send them through, and we would be happy to answer any of those. We'll give it a minute and see what comes through. Thank you. Okay, I have a question here. What surprised you most? This is for Dr. Hamilton. What surprised you most about your year 1 learnings?
So in previous research with basic income pilots around the world for 60 years, we found either consistent employment or just very, very slight declines in employment. And I want to, just for anyone who's not already immersed in the basic income literature, we usually see those slight declines among women who have small children, so they're better able to take care of their children, or sometimes in some pilots we've seen small decreases in, especially in developing countries, small decreases in employment in youth. So, instead of dropping out of school, they're able to stay in school. So the fact that we nearly doubled employment was stunning to me. The fact that that's, that's far and above some of the other literature. It is consistent with the Stockton pilot that came out. They came out with the year 1 results, and they saw something like a 40% increase in employment. Don't quote me on that, but it was a significant increase in employment as well. So because our numbers are smaller in Hudson, I can't say this was a statistically significant change, but we do want to keep tracking that throughout the course of the pilot. We want to, merge those results with what's happening in other pilots and other places. And the fact that we're expanding our pilot to more participants will help us increase our numbers and know if we're really looking at something significant there.
Amazing, thank you. Let's see, I see another question here. Could you speak to the difference between this, for folks that may not be that familiar, it sounds like the difference between UBI, basic income, and guaranteed income, and where HudsonUP falls into that?
Right. So in HudsonUP, we call ourselves, and Joan, I want you to jump in too here because you were more involved in those discussions than I was. So HudsonUP is technically a UBI pilot demonstration. So universal basic income obviously implies that everyone in a population gets it. Obviously, that's not what we're doing with 75 people in Hudson, New York, but we are, this is a demonstration to better understand what it would look like if everyone was eligible for a basic income universally. There are some pilots who are a guaranteed income, and that's closer to something like a negative income tax that was discussed in the 1960s and 70s. Martin Luther King used the terminology guaranteed income. In the end, there's a lot of literature that compares basic income, universal basic income, or guaranteed income. And it really just has to do on sort of like the distribution mechanism. Do you give it to everybody? In a universal basic income, you give it to everybody and then sort of tax it back from the people with highest incomes at tax time. And it's sort of the opposite with a guaranteed income. You sort of means test everyone on the front end and give it out. So the net effect, there's a lot of literature finding that the net effect of both is basically the same thing. It's just like how much, administration and how much bureaucracy do you want to put on it. And also there's a question of, if you're doing that means testing at the front end for a guaranteed income, does that put extra burdens on people who need assistance immediately? So there's a healthy debate out there about, BI versus GI, the net effect in the long term is probably the same. It's just kind of how you want to administer it. And I want Joan to talk a little bit about why HudsonUP decided to go with, the term UBI.
Sure. So I think a couple reasons. One is we were one of the first, one of a handful of pilots, and now there are, I think we're close to 100 or over 100 across the nation in some form. So I think one of the reasons was just the identifiability of UBI as a frame. And so that was one reason. And also we've talked a lot with our steering committee about there's the universal and then there's the U that could mean unconditional basic income. And so I think are of the mind that those are they both have meaning within our pilot. And while we are not truly universal, because we are obviously it's folks that make under the median income in Hudson, we do have hopes and dreams that one day there will be a policy nationally that is more universal in nature. So I think those are, the two reasons. One is for us kind of being identified as a UBI, as doing this work. And the other is to kind of hopefully get there one day and be able to support any policies that are moving in that direction. Let's see. Question here. How do you see HudsonUP as different from other pilots across the country that you're familiar with?
Yeah. I think you already mentioned it, Joan. The 5-year time horizon is really unique. A lot of pilots that are going on right now are 12 months, 24 months. And I think 24 months might be the longest I've seen in other places. So I think that's really important because a lot of the folks that are in this pilot and a lot of folks across the country have really complex barriers, in their lives. We see that in the TANF literature, that's temporary assistance needy families, that's our traditional welfare system. A lot of folks leave that system because they hit the time limits, which in many places is 12, 24 months, not because their lives are magically fixed. They've got, gainful employment and good, valuable skills. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when you give people that little extra breathing space, 5 years to really get their feet under them. A lot of people are facing complex barriers. They could have, had several people in the pilot had injuries at work they're not able to take care of their family like they were before. So, giving them a little bit more time to either retrain for a new job or, overcome medical challenges or, people who are caring for children with severe disabilities. That takes a lot of time and energy. That you can devote to, building a career, that sort of thing, or people who are raising small children, single moms who are raising small children, allowing their children to get a little bit older. There's so many complex barriers that I think we overlook in normal public policy that people are facing, that this 5-year time horizon will give people a little bit extra time to overcome. And also just, as I said, I think one of the most amazing things is when you take away people's financial stress, they suddenly have this ability to start thinking about the future, where if you're just living day by day, all you can think about is, putting food on the table, how are you going to pay your rent? How are you going to pay your bills? And there's a whole body of research called the psychology of scarcity that says when you've got those wheels turning in your back of your head all the time, how am I going to, cover my kids' field trip? How am I going to buy food for my kids? You're not thinking about, how am I going to retire and how am I going to build a business? Those sorts of things. So taking away those immediate stressors can shift people to start thinking in the long term. But it takes time to build towards those goals. So it's going to be really amazing to be able to watch people move toward those goals, go back to school, build small businesses, build their savings, and really reach dreams that they couldn't even think about before when they were just in day-to-day survival mode.
Mm-hmm. That's so interesting.
Do you want to add anything to that, Joan? Because you're immersed in this too.
I would say that us being a small city pilot is unique. We were one of the first, I think, if not the first, that was in a small city. A lot of other pilots that you hear about are in much larger urban areas. And so I think when we tell the story of UBI, or basic income or guaranteed income, as a small city, we're really speaking to small cities and small towns across America with our findings and with the impact it's having on the local community. So I think that's a really interesting thing that also differentiates us a little bit from other pilots.
Yeah.
And this is a question from me, which I'm super interested in this, and I know you're an expert here. So can you talk about the sort of the different ways of thinking about UBI versus the current social safety net, and sort of what it means to folks that have had experience with both in both systems?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So before I started doing research on basic income, I did a lot of research on traditional safety net programs like TANF, temporary assistance to needy families. And what I kept finding over and over again is that there's so many barriers we put on eligibility, income limits, asset limits that trap people in poverty. So something really important about income limits for eligibility. These programs are set up because we don't want people who are very rich taking advantage of them. So we set very, very low income limits. But the problem with that is that research finds again and again, if people get a 10-cent raise, they're kicked off of everything, not just TANF, but food stamps, childcare assistance, and they're worse off than they were before. So why would they make the choice, to take a few extra hours at work if it means, the inability to afford quality childcare, the inability to feed your children, right? So they get trapped with their income. And then a lot of states have asset limits to be eligible for public assistance programs. And in a lot of places, these limits haven't been increased since the 1980s. I'm not kidding. The disability limit, if you're on SSI, was set in the 80s and hasn't increased since then. So you can't build savings. You can't build a business. You can't, build up, you can't save to go back to school. You can't have enough savings to get through your next major car repair. So people are really trapped by these programs. So some folks are really starting to think about that. I ask people about their experience with traditional assistance versus HudsonUP, and a lot of people are seeing those things. They're seeing that that they were trapped by those rules, and that HudsonUP allows them to do those things, to grow their income, to grow their assets, without those same restrictions on eligibility. I think, and some people really touched on how paternalized they felt by traditional assistance programs, especially people who had struggled with addiction or struggled with mental health and issues in their life. And they really felt like the public agencies were constantly looking over their shoulder and questioning them. I just want to make an aside, especially about Hudson. What's interesting is when I ask people in Hudson, what are your experiences with these traditional programs? Because I'm so immersed in this literature on traditional assistance and how destructive it can be for a lot of people, I'm always blown away by the folks in Hudson who tell me, I had a great experience. All the caseworkers there are lovely. They're lovely people. They're always really helpful. And I'm always really stunned when I hear that. So I don't want to throw the Columbia County DSS workers under the bus here, because 90% of the people in the pilot have had fabulous experiences with those particular caseworkers. But that doesn't change these federal policies that that limit people's income and assets, and can be on a national scale really destructive to people escaping poverty in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting that you say that, because having onboarded almost all 75 participants myself, I can just speak to sort of the fear of having to pay back this money, and the fear of just this being too good to be true. So I think there's generally a systems mistrust when it comes to what folks' experience has been. And even though maybe interpersonally it hasn't been bad, I think overall there is still a fear of doing the wrong thing or getting caught, and so that surveillance that the current system sort of presents to folks is something that's so different. And I think as folks have gotten acclimated within the pilot, they're like, you're really not asking me for receipts. Like I had several people say, like, do I have to submit receipts? And I'm like, no, not at all. Like, and that's what I love so much about basic income and universal basic income is that it really, it provides that agency to the individual to do with the money what they feel is best for them and their family. And I think it's so empowering. And to see that change in mindset over time has been remarkable.
When I talk to people in other pilots, not Hudson Up, about their experiences with traditional assistance, it's really interesting because they'll tell me like that they just, have to jump through a million hoops. They'll tell me I had to take a day off work to take a bus to this office and then, get this form and then take a bus to this office and get this form, and just these crazy things they have to do to remain eligible. Like you said, submitting receipts and submitting paperwork that gets lost. And we really just put folks who are, who need assistance the most through all these hoops to prove that they're eligible.
Are there any other questions from anyone watching? Here's one. Do you think people treat a permanent and universal basic income differently from a temporary basic income that might be thought of as a gift and to a lucky small group of people?
That's a really important question. I think one of the, the primary criticisms we see of a lot of the pilots is, if we're trying to build an evidence base for a national policy, are people responding differently to something that they just see as, really temporary to if you knew that it was going to come every month for the rest of your life or something. And there's certainly some research on out there on that. I think that Hudson Up is going to be unique in that we have this 5-year time horizon. So I think we'll have a better measurement of kind of what happens in the long term. Because sure, if it was 12 months, people might respond very, very differently. They might, really scramble to kind of get things set up for when the pilot ends. So I think it'll be really important, Hudson, to kind of measure what happens in the long term. And I just want to say that, there's so many pilots going on right now. There's something like, 100 cities in the Marys for Guaranteed Income coalitions. There's so much research going on right now. So much important research is going to come out in the next few years about the impacts of basic income. So, and, we're excited to play one small part in that.
I think it'll be super interesting after the 5 years to demonstrate the difference that we see with the shorter pilots and this one. Even if it's on a smaller scale, I think if what we're advocating for is a long-term basic income for all Americans, then what we're really looking at is this longer time frame, not just the a year to 18 months. Could a local government UBI be tax positive to a local government, perhaps when you account for the savings in local government services?
That's interesting. I think that local government UBI, there's certainly plenty of pilots experiments going on right now, launched by cities or, by states. There's some states who are getting ready to launch it. It's my understanding that that's going to be, especially in small localities like Hudson, it's just way too costly to, in the long term, be implemented by small local governments or, or even city governments. I think just financially, and I'm getting a little outside my expertise here, so please dig into the literature on this a bit more. But I think in the long term, I think most advocates see this as something that's better financed federally. And also, just to editorialize a little bit, when we have done things like leave state control up to federal policies like TANF, what we found is that some states will use funds to do really amazing revolutionary things, and some states don't do really amazing revolutionary things. They will, some states kind of take 80% of their TANF funds and throw it into a slush fund for the state or something. So I think we have to be really careful about thinking about the justice elements if we are really thinking about this at the national scale, that some folks may be fall through the cracks if we're just sort of doing this patchwork here and there. I realize your question is also talking about savings for local government services. So to build on that, again, I'm not sure that's a long-term sustainable plan for these for long-term UBI to be financed and governed by local governments. But I can say on a larger scale, there's definitely going to be savings created by reducing the stress on social service bureaucracies, and administration is a lot simpler. So just for example, the TANF administration rate is something like 23% or something. The administration rate for Social Security is less than 1%. And that's because it's a lot simpler to administer. Everybody gets it that, you have a computer calculation of how much everybody gets, and then they get their checks every month, and that's it. And it would be really similar for UBI, but, with TANF, you constantly got to be checking people's eligibility. You got to have caseworkers to be, overseeing people or paternalizing them, right? So the administration rate is a lot higher. So I think that in the larger scheme of things, I think at the federal level, we would see a lot of reductions in administration fees. I also want to talk a little bit about the tax base. So with the recently expanded child tax credit, there was a lot of projections that this was going to increase a tax base for local governments, right? Because especially when you put money in the hands of people of low incomes, they immediately go out and spend it at their local grocery store or something. And so that increases the local sales tax. So there's a projections that this was, just the child tax credit alone was increasing the state and local taxes by millions of dollars, and really supporting state and local governments. I hope that's not too far afield of where that question was going. Do you want to add anything to that, Joan?
No, it's just been really interesting to see how different pilots across the country are funding. I mean, we're super lucky here at HudsonUP to have the generous support of the Spark of Hudson Foundation. And for the first cohort, it was Humanity Forward was participating as well as a funder. But I've seen, and we've had outreach from pilots all across the country that are doing things very differently, and, struggling with kind of how to administer a pilot and what it looks like for program staff on the ground, et cetera. Because there definitely is some support for the cohorts that need to happen. So it's been fascinating. I think Rochester is looking to fund their pilot with legal marijuana tax. And so there's, all kinds of creative thinking around how to fund pilots until hopefully one day we can see a national policy that supports it. I don't see any other questions coming in at the moment. But this was super informative and interesting, not new to me, but I'm sure for everyone watching. And we can't wait to kind of see how the research progresses over the next 5 years, and particularly with the influx of the additional 50 participants, which will be huge to contribute to our narrative here. So thank you so much, Dr. Hamilton, for all of your work. And hopefully welcome you back to Hudson in person soon.
In the summer, knock on wood.
Yeah.